For 7 years, I lived with the guilt of killing my baby with my defective genes. Then the hospital called with security footage that shattered everything I believed, and the face on that screen belonged to the one person I never suspected. My name is Bethany Hartwell, and if you'd told me last week that everything I believed about the worst day of my life was a lie, I would have said you were cruel for even suggesting it. But here I am, sitting in my living room, holding a court document that says, "Murder in the first degree," where I once believed it should say, "genetic tragedy." The call came on a Tuesday. I remember because I was organizing returns at the bookstore where I work, sorting romance novels with their promises of happy endings that felt like mockery. 7 years of living with the knowledge that my body, my genes, my family line had poisoned my 3-week-old son, Noah. 7 years of my ex-husband Devin's words echoing in my head, "Your defective genes killed our baby." But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand who we were before you can understand what they did to us, to Noah, to me. I was 31 when I met Devin Hartwell at a medical conference in downtown Chicago. I wasn't attending as a professional. I was the librarian organizing the research materials for the presenters. Devin was there representing his pharmaceutical company, all sharp suits and sharper smile. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in a room full of hundreds. His mother Vera would later call it the Hartwell charm, as if it were some sort of birthright passed down through generations of successful men. "You're not like the usual medical crowd," he'd said, finding me restacking journals during the lunch break. "You actually seem to enjoy what you're doing." "Books don't argue back," I'd replied, and his laugh had been genuine, warm, not the calculated chuckle I'd learned to recognize later. Devin pursued me with the same intensity he applied to his sales targets. Flowers delivered to the elementary school library where I worked. Surprise lunches where he'd show up with soup from my favorite deli. He even volunteered to read to the kindergartners one afternoon, his voice animated as he acted out all the characters in their favorite picture book. The teachers swooned. The principal joked about cloning him. His mother Vera was less impressed. The first time Devin brought me to their family estate, a sprawling Victorian that had been in the Hartwell family for generations, she'd studied me like I was a specimen under a microscope. "Bethany," she'd said, drawing out each syllable. "Such a common name. And you're a librarian? How quaint. I suppose everyone has their calling." She was a retired nurse who'd married into pharmaceutical money, and she wore her husband's success like armor. Every interaction with her felt like a test I was failing. But Devin stood by me, or so I thought. "Don't mind. Mother," he'd say. "She's protective. Once we give her grandchildren, she'll soften." We married 2 years after that first meeting. The wedding was everything Vera wanted. Country club reception, ice sculptures, a string quartet, playing classical pieces I didn't recognize. My family looked uncomfortable in their rented formal wear, while Devin's side glided through the event like they'd been born in tuxedos. My sister Camille pulled me aside during the reception, whispering, "Beth, are you sure about this? They seem to think we're the entertainment." I was sure. I was in love. And when I found out I was pregnant 6 months later, Devin's joy seemed to validate every doubt I'd pushed aside. He transformed overnight into the perfect expectant father. Baby books stacked on his nightstand, prenatal vitamins organized by day of the week. He even installed an app on his phone that showed him what size fruit our baby matched each week. "Week 16, he'd announce at breakfast. "Our son is the size of an avocado." "Could be a daughter," I'd remind him. "Hartwell men produce sons," he'd say with such certainty. 3 generations of firstborn boys. It's practically genetic destiny. That word, genetic, would come to haunt me in ways I couldn't imagine as I sat there, hand on my growing belly, believing in our future. Vera had insisted on genetic testing early in the pregnancy. "Just to be safe," she'd said, "with your family history being so unclear." My family history. My parents were both adopted, closed adoptions from the 1960s when records were sealed tight. We knew nothing about biological grandparents, medical histories, ancestral conditions. It had never mattered before. It shouldn't have mattered then. But when Noah arrived 3 weeks early, tiny but perfect with Devin's nose and my eyes, none of that seemed important. For exactly 11 days, we were a perfect family. Devin would rush home from work to hold him. I'd catch them in the nursery, Devin whispering promises about baseball games and business lessons, about the legacy he'd build for his son. Then came day 12. Noah wouldn't eat. His tiny body burned with fever. The pediatrician sent us straight to the emergency room, and suddenly our perfect family was living in the NICU, watching machines breathe for our son while doctors spoke in hushed tones about metabolic disorders and genetic mutations. The image that haunts me most isn't from the day Noah died. It's from 2 days before, when the genetic counselor pulled us into that small, airless room with inspirational posters about chromosomes and heredity. Devin's face as she explained the rare recessive gene disorder, supposedly inherited from my side. The way his hand slipped from mine like I was contagious. The exact moment his love curdled into disgust. "Your defective genes," he'd said in the corridor afterward while our son lay dying. "You killed him." For 7 years, I believed him. For 7 years, I carried that guilt like a stone in my chest. Every baby I saw, every happy family in the bookstore, every pregnancy announcement on social media, they all whispered the same accusation. "You killed him." Until that Tuesday. Until Dr. Shannon Reeves called and said the words that changed everything. "Your son didn't have a genetic disorder, Miss Hartwell. Someone murdered him." And the someone had a face, a name, a set of keys to the NICU. The same woman who'd questioned my worthiness to marry her son had decided my baby wasn't worthy to live. Vera Caldwell, with her perfect hair and pharmacy access, had injected poison into my 3-week-old son's IV line while I slept in a chair beside his incubator, exhausted from keeping vigil. But I didn't know that yet, standing in my apartment that Tuesday afternoon, phone pressed to my ear, the world tilting off its axis, as Dr. Reeves said, "Can you come to the hospital? There's something you need to see." 7 years after losing Noah, I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a bakery on the south side of Chicago. The smell of fresh bread at dawn was my only comfort some mornings, a reminder that life continued to rise despite everything. My apartment was sparse but clean, furnished with secondhand pieces that didn't match but somehow worked together. Nothing like the Victorian house Devin and I had shared, with its original hardwood floors and leaded glass windows that threw rainbows across the nursery we'd painted soft yellow. That Tuesday started like every other day. I woke at 6, made coffee in the same blue mug I'd used since the divorce, and sat at my small kitchen table sorting through a box of photographs I'd finally worked up the courage to open. For years, that box had lived in my closet like a sealed tomb. But my therapist, Dr. Monica Reese, had been gently pushing me toward what she called integration. "You can't heal from a wound you won't look at, Bethany," she'd said during our last session. "Those memories are part of your story, even if the story hurts." The first photo stopped my breath. Devin and me at Navy Pier, his arms wrapped around my pregnant belly, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember. We looked so young, so certain that life would unfold exactly as we'd planned. Devin's hand rested protectively over where Noah was growing, and my hand covered his. We'd been a unit then, or so I'd believed. The next photo was worse. Noah, 1 day old, sleeping in the hospital bassinet with his tiny fist curled against his cheek. I'd taken hundreds of photos in his 3 weeks of life, as if some part of me knew I'd need evidence he'd existed. His hair had been dark like Devin's, but the nurses said it might have changed. We'd never know. "People always say time heals everything," I said aloud to the empty room, a habit I'd developed living alone. But some wounds just learn to hide better. I worked part-time at Chapters and Verse, an independent bookstore downtown. The owner, Patricia Chen, had hired me 2 years after the divorce, when I couldn't bear to return to the elementary school library. Being around children, hearing their laughter, watching parents pick them up at the end of the day, it had been too much. At the bookstore, I could hide in the inventory room when families came in for Saturday story time. Patricia never asked why. My life had shrunk to safe, manageable proportions. Work, therapy, occasional dinners with my sister Camille when she could find a babysitter. I'd learned to navigate conversations that skirted around children, marriage, and the future. When customers asked if I had kids, I developed a smile that shut down further questions. "No, just me," I'd say. turning back to the register or the shelves. But that morning, looking at the photos, I let myself remember the before times. Devin had been everything I wasn't, confident where I was quiet, ambitious where I was content, connected where I was anonymous. His family owned half the real estate in Lake Forest, and his great-grandfather's name was on a wing at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The Hartwells didn't just have money, they had legacy. "Our son will be extraordinary," Devin used to say, his hand on my belly during those 9 months of pregnancy. "With my business sense and your gentle heart, he'll conquer the world." He'd mapped out Noah's entire future: private schools, Yale like his father, then Harvard Business School, maybe politics, if the boy showed aptitude. "The Hartwell name opens doors," he'd say, "but Noah will walk through them on his own merit." Vera had been less subtle about her expectations. At my baby shower, held at her country club naturally, she'd given a toast that felt more like a warning. "To my future grandson," she'd said, raising her champagne. "May he inherit the best of the Hartwell line." She'd looked directly at me when she emphasized Hartwell, as if the baby I was carrying had nothing to do with me beyond incubation. My mother had squeezed my hand under the table. She knew how Vera made me feel, like an interloper who'd somehow stolen Devin from a more suitable match. "She's just protective," my mother had whispered. "She'll warm up when the baby comes." But Vera never got the chance to warm up, or so I'd thought. Noah was born on a Thursday evening in March, 3 weeks early but healthy. 6 pounds, 4 ounces of perfect baby boy. Devin had cried when the doctor placed Noah on my chest. Real tears, not the practiced emotion he displayed at company events. For that moment, we were just parents, overwhelmed by the miracle of our son. "He's perfect," Devin had whispered, his finger trapped in Noah's impossibly small grip. "Look what we made, Beth. Look what we did." The next 11 days had been a blur of firsts. First diaper change, first bath, first time home. Devin took a week off work, unheard of for him, and we nested in our Victorian house like we were the only 3 people in the world. Vera visited once, holding Noah with practiced efficiency while critiquing my breastfeeding technique and the nursery's organization. But even she seemed softened by Noah's presence, calling him my little prince as she adjusted his blanket. Then came day 12, when Noah's cry changed from hungry to pained, when his perfect pink skin flushed with fever, when our pediatrician's calm concern became urgent action. The transformation was so sudden, so complete, that sometimes I wondered if those first 11 days had been a dream. One morning, we were new parents arguing playfully about whether Noah had my nose or Devin's. By evening, we were watching our son struggle to breathe while machines beeped their warnings. I set down the photo of newborn Noah and picked up the last one in the pile, Devin and me, on our wedding day. We stood beneath an arch of white roses, his hand on my waist, my head tilted toward his shoulder. Behind us, slightly out of focus but unmistakably present, stood Vera in her mother-of-the-groom navy dress, her expression unreadable. Even in our wedding photo, she was watching, evaluating, planning. The coffee had gone cold in my blue mug. Outside, Chicago was waking up. Sirens in the distance, the bakery downstairs opening its doors, life moving forward as it always did. I'd learned to find comfort in that rhythm, the predictable flow of days that asked nothing of me but presence. In 4 hours, Dr. Shannon Reeves would call and shatter this careful quietude. She would say words that would transform every memory, every photo, every moment of guilt I'd carried for 7 years. But that morning, I was just Bethany Hartwell, 38 years old, childless, divorced, sorting through photos of a life that had ended when my son took his last breath in the NICU at Riverside General Hospital. I thought I knew how my story ended. I thought my guilt was my penance, my isolation was my consequence, my quiet life above the bakery was all I deserved after failing Noah with my defective genes. The truth, when it came, would be so much worse and so much better than the lie I'd been living. But that morning, I just held my son's photo and whispered what I always whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. Mommy's so sorry." Noah's decline started with a refused feeding on March 23rd, a Thursday morning that began with such ordinary concerns. I remembered checking the clock, 6:15 a.m., worried only that he might be developing a irregular schedule. By noon, that small worry had transformed into terror as his temperature climbed to 102 degrees, despite the acetaminophen drops our pediatrician prescribed over the phone. "Babies get fevers," Dr. Hendricks had said calmly, "but bring him in if it doesn't break by evening." It didn't break. It climbed. By the time Devin rushed home from work at 4, Noah's tiny body was burning at 103.5, his usual strong cry reduced to weak whimpers that sounded wrong, felt wrong, were wrong in every way a mother's instinct could detect. The emergency room at Riverside General became our new home within hours. Noah was admitted to the NICU, hooked to monitors that tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every failing system in his 3-week-old body. The doctors spoke in medical terminology that Devin translated with increasing panic: metabolic acidosis, enzymatic deficiency, mitochondrial dysfunction. "We need to run genetic panels," Dr. Elizabeth Crow explained on day 3 of our NICU vigil. "Some conditions only manifest after birth, triggered by the stress of independent metabolism." I lived in that NICU chair for 2 weeks. Devin came and went, his presence decreasing as the prognosis worsened. At first, he'd held my hand during the rounds, asked intelligent questions, challenged treatment plans with the authority of someone used to being heard. But something shifted after the first genetic panel came back. "Inconclusive but concerning," the genetic counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Marie, had said. "We're seeing markers that suggest a rare autosomal recessive condition. This means both parents would need to carry the gene, but it would likely come from the same ancestral line." Devin's questions became accusations disguised as medical inquiry. "What about Bethany's family history? Her parents were both adopted, correct? Closed adoptions?" Marie nodded carefully. "That does complicate our ability to trace the genetic lineage." "My family is documented for 5 generations," Devin said, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "Every medical record, every death certificate, no metabolic disorders, no genetic conditions." The moment our marriage ended wasn't when Noah died. It was 3 days before, in that airless conference room with the chromosomal charts on the walls. Marie had just finished explaining how the condition, if confirmed, was inherited through recessive genes that could hide for generations. "Your cousin Jennifer," Devin said suddenly, turning to me, "the one who died at 17, you said it was a car accident." "It was a car accident," I insisted, confused by the interrogation. "But she was sick before, wasn't she? Your aunt mentioned something at our wedding about Jennifer being frail." "She had chronic fatigue syndrome. That has nothing to do with—" "How would you know?" Devin's voice cracked like a whip. "You don't even know your biological grandparents' names. You don't know what diseases run in your blood. And now our son is dying because of what you don't know." Vera arrived that evening, having driven down from Lake Forest the moment Devin called her. She swept into the NICU like she owned it, her former nursing background giving her automatic authority with the staff. She studied Noah's charts, questioned the nurses, and pulled Devin aside for hushed conversations that stopped whenever I approached. "We should get a second opinion," Vera announced. "I know the head of genetics at Northwestern. He owes me a favor." But there wasn't time for second opinions. Noah's kidneys were failing. His liver showed signs of distress. The metabolic specialist, Dr. Raymond Park, delivered what felt like a death sentence wrapped in medical kindness. "The condition appears to be a form of organic acidemia. Without the proper enzymes to process certain proteins, toxic substances build up in the blood. Some children live for years with careful management, but when it presents this early, this aggressively—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Devin turned to me with eyes I didn't recognize. "Your defective genes are killing our son." The words hung in the antiseptic air of the NICU. A nurse adjusting Noah's IV glanced our way, then quickly looked back to her work. Even she could feel the violence in Devin's accusation. "Devin, please. This isn't anyone's fault. Genetic conditions just happen." "No," he cut me off. "They don't just happen. They're inherited, passed down through generations of people who shouldn't—" He stopped himself, but the unfinished sentence was clear. People who shouldn't have children. People like me. "My mother was right," he continued, his voice now cold and businesslike. She wanted me to insist on comprehensive genetic testing before we married. She said your unknown background was a liability. I defended you. I said love was enough, and now my son is dying because I was weak. Our son, I whispered. He's our son, Devin. No. Devin stood, straightening his tie as if preparing for a board meeting. He's dying because of your genes, your family's secrets, your biological history that you were either too lazy or too selfish to uncover before bringing a child into this world. He left the NICU then, and I knew he wasn't coming back. Not really. His body would return. He would stand by Noah's incubator during the final hours, would sign the necessary papers, would attend the funeral in his black suit. But my husband, the man who'd read stories to kindergartners and cried at Noah's birth, that man left the NICU that night and never returned. The next days blurred together. Devin consulted lawyers while our son struggled to breathe. He moved into the guest room of our Victorian house while I kept vigil at the hospital. Vera brought me food I didn't eat and offered comfort that felt like judgment. "This is devastating for Devin," she said, sitting beside me as Noah's monitors beeped their irregular rhythm. "To know his perfect son was destroyed by preventable circumstances. If only you'd been honest about your genetic uncertainty." "I was honest," I said numbly. "I told Devin my parents were adopted. I never hid anything." "Omission is a form of dishonesty, dear. You should have refused to have children knowing the risks." "What risks?" I wanted to scream. "The risk of being human? The risk of biology being unpredictable? The risk of loving someone who could break your heart?" But I said nothing because Noah was dying, and nothing else mattered. When Noah passed at 3:47 a.m. on April 6th, Devin was in the hospital chapel. Vera was in the cafeteria. I was alone with my son, holding his tiny hand as the monitors flatlined, whispering apologies for the genetic curse I'd apparently given him, promising him that Mommy loved him despite her defective genes, despite her poisonous bloodline, despite everything Devin said was wrong with me. The funeral was held at Vera's church in Lake Forest. Devin delivered a eulogy about potential lost and dreams destroyed. He never once looked at me. The divorce papers were delivered the next day, citing irreconcilable differences and grievous emotional harm. His lawyer, one of Vera's country club friends named Harrison Blackwood, was brutally efficient. "Given the circumstances of the child's death and your genetic culpability, Mr. Hartwell is entitled to significant compensation for emotional damages," Harrison explained in his oak-paneled office. "However, he's willing to forego pressing charges for negligent infliction of emotional distress if you agree to these terms." The terms took everything. The house, the savings, even the car. I signed because what was the point of fighting? My son was dead. My marriage was over. And according to everyone who mattered, it was all my fault. The call came at 2:17 p.m. on that Tuesday afternoon, 7 years after Noah's death. I was at work processing returns at Chapters and Verse when my phone vibrated against the wooden counter. The number was unfamiliar but local, a 312 area code. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another collections call about the medical debt I was still paying off from Noah's final days. "Miss Hartwell? Bethany Hartwell?" The woman's voice was professional but carried an undertone of urgency that made me step away from the register. "Yes, this is Bethany. My name is Dr. Shannon Reeves. I'm the new chief of pediatrics at Riverside General Hospital. I need to discuss your son Noah's case with you. It's extremely important." My body went cold. 7 years, and hearing Noah's name from a stranger still felt like touching an exposed wire. "I don't understand. Noah passed away 7 years ago." "I'm aware, Miss Hartwell. That's why I'm calling. We've discovered some significant discrepancies in his medical records that require immediate attention. Can you come to the hospital today?" "Discrepancies?" My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Patricia looked over from the coffee station, concern creasing her features. "I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you be here within the hour? I'll clear my schedule." The urgency in her voice overrode my instinct to avoid that hospital forever. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. I told Patricia I had a family emergency, grabbed my jacket, and drove to Riverside General on autopilot. The building looked exactly the same, 12 stories of brown brick and tinted, windows that had housed the worst 2 weeks of my life. The parking garage still smelled like exhaust and industrial cleaner. The elevator still made that grinding noise between the third and fourth floors. Dr. Shannon Reeves met me in the lobby herself, not sending an assistant or nurse. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of carefully controlled expression that suggested she was about to deliver devastating news. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, leading me not to her office but to a private conference room on the administrative floor. "Please sit down." The room held a long table, multiple chairs, and a wall of windows overlooking the parking lot. But what made my stomach drop were the other people already seated. A man in a suit who looked like hospital legal counsel, and another man whose bearing screamed law enforcement despite his business casual attire. "Ms. Hartwell, this is our legal counsel, James Morrison, and Detective Jerome Watts from the Chicago Police Department." "Police?" I sank into the offered chair. "What is this about?" Dr. Reeves sat across from me, her hands folded on a thick file folder. "Ms. Hartwell, 3 months ago, we began a comprehensive digitization of our medical records as part of a system upgrade. During this process, we discovered that several infant files from 7 years ago had been corrupted or misfiled. Your son Noah's case was among them." She opened the folder, revealing pages of medical charts I recognized and others I didn't. The genetic testing results that were attributed to Noah weren't actually his. They belonged to another infant who was in the NICU at the same time, a baby who did have a metabolic disorder but survived with treatment. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table. "What are you saying?" "Noah didn't have a genetic condition, Miss Hartwell. His actual test results showed completely normal metabolic function. There was no organic acidemia, no enzymatic deficiency, nothing wrong with his genetics at all. 7 years of guilt, 7 years of carrying the weight of my supposedly defective genes, 7 years of believing I'd killed my son with my tainted bloodline. All of it crumbled in an instant." "Then what killed him?" Detective Watts leaned forward. "That's where this becomes a criminal investigation. When Dr. Reeves discovered the discrepancy, she ordered a complete review of Noah's case, including toxicology records that weren't part of the original file." Dr. Reeves pulled out another document. "We found massive levels of potassium chloride in Noah's blood samples, levels that could only have been introduced externally." "Externally?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Injected," Detective Watts said bluntly. "Someone injected a lethal dose of potassium chloride into your son's IV line. This wasn't a medical error or genetic condition. Your son was murdered." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Murdered. Not killed by my genes. Not destroyed by my unknown biological heritage. Murdered. But who would... I stopped, unable to finish the question because the answer was too impossible, too horrible to contemplate. "That's what we needed to determine," Detective Watts continued. "The hospital recently upgraded their security system, which included recovering and digitizing old surveillance footage from their archived drives. We have video from the NICU during the time frame when the injection would have occurred." Dr. Reeves opened a laptop on the table. "I need to warn you, Miss Hartwell, what you're about to see will be disturbing." "Show me," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. She turned the screen toward me. The footage was black and white, grainy but clear enough. The timestamp read April 6th, 3:47 a.m., exactly 1 hour before Noah died. The NICU was dimly lit, the night shift sparse. A figure in scrubs entered the frame, moving purposefully past other incubators, heading directly for Noah's. The person was careful, checking over their shoulder, but for one moment, just a single damning moment, they looked directly at the camera. The face was partially obscured by a surgical mask, but the eyes, the distinctive way she held her shoulders, the practiced efficiency of her movements as she prepared the syringe, I knew. "That's Vera," I said, my voice hollow. "That's Devon's mother." Detective Watts nodded grimly. "Vera Caldwell, former registered nurse, retired 2015. She had access to the hospital through her volunteer work with the pediatric ward. She knew the blind spots, the shift changes, the codes. But why? The question tore out of me. Why would she kill her own grandchild?" Dr. Reeves pulled out another set of documents. We think we know. These are Devin Hartwell's actual genetic testing results from a screening done 3 months before Noah was born. He's a carrier for Huntington's disease. It's a dominant gene, Miss Hartwell. If Noah had lived, there was a 50% chance he would have developed it. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Vera, with her obsession about the Hartwell legacy. Vera, who'd questioned my genetics from day one. Vera, who couldn't bear the thought that her perfect son carried an imperfect gene. She knew, I whispered. She knew about Devin's Huntington's marker. We found evidence she'd accessed his medical records illegally through her nursing connections, Detective Watts confirmed. We believe she made a decision to eliminate the evidence of the Hartwell genetic imperfection and frame you for it instead. We also discovered this, Dr. Reeves added, sliding another paper across the table. A life insurance policy taken out on Noah 2 days after his birth. The beneficiary was Devin, but it only paid out for death due to genetic conditions. The payout was $500,000. $500,000. The exact amount Devin had used to start his new pharmaceutical distribution company, the one that had made him wealthy enough to remarry into Chicago society, to buy a new house in Lincoln Park, to start the new family he'd posted about on social media, the healthy twin boys who would never know they had a half-brother who died for their grandmother's pride. We need your permission to proceed with the arrest, Detective Watts said. We have enough evidence for murder charges against Vera Caldwell and conspiracy charges against Devin Hartwell, if he knew about it. I thought about 7 years of therapy, 7 years of my sister Camille keeping her children away from me in case my defective genes were contagious, 7 years of my mother crying on Noah's birthday, 7 years of Devin telling everyone who would listen that his first wife's genetics had killed his son. Yes, I said, my voice steady for the first time in 7 years. Arrest them both. Detective Watts set up the arrests like a choreographed operation. Vera would be taken at her Tuesday evening book club at the Lake Forest Country Club. Devin would be arrested at his pharmaceutical company's headquarters in the Loop during his weekly executive meeting. The timing was deliberate. Public enough to prevent flight, controlled enough to ensure safety. I waited in a small room at the police station, watching the clock tick toward 6 p.m. when both arrests would happen simultaneously. Dr. Reeves had stayed with me, this woman I'd just met who'd uncovered the truth that everyone else had missed for 7 years. There's more, she said quietly as we waited. We found Vera's personal computer records during the warrant search this afternoon. She'd been researching potassium chloride for weeks before Noah was born. Browser history shows she looked up dosages, detection methods, how long it stays in blood samples. This was planned, Miss Hartwell. The moment she learned about Devin's Huntington's marker, she started planning. The horror of it sat like lead in my stomach. While I'd been picking out cribs and folding tiny one-socks, my mother-in-law had been researching how to murder my baby. She kept journals, Detective Watts said, entering the room with the evidence box. We need you to identify some things, if you can. He pulled out a leather-bound notebook, Vera's distinctive handwriting filling the pages. I recognized it from the thank you notes she'd send after dinner parties. Always perfectly worded, always slightly condescending. March 10th, Detective Watts read aloud. Devin's results confirmed. Huntington's marker present. 50% chance for any offspring. This cannot be the Hartwell legacy. Alternative solutions must be considered. March 15th. Bethany's family history provides perfect cover. Closed adoptions, no traceable genetics. If something were to happen, blame would naturally fall on her unknown lineage. March 20th. Devin remains unaware of his results. Better he never knows. His confidence is his strength. Learning he's genetically compromised would destroy him. Each entry was worse than the last. She'd written about watching me hold Noah, calculating how long she'd need to wait before acting. She'd observed my exhaustion in the NICU, noting when I'd fall asleep in the chair. She'd even practiced her reaction for when Noah died, writing, must appear shocked, but not hysterical, supportive of Devin's anger toward Bethany. At 6:23 p.m., Detective Watts's phone rang. Caldwell is in custody. He listened, then nodded. And Hartwell? Yes, good. Bring them both in for processing. The next hours blurred. Vera arrived first, still in her St. John suit from book club, her silver hair perfectly coiffed even in handcuffs. She saw me through the interview room window, and her expression didn't change. Cold, controlled, imperious to the end. Devin arrived 30 minutes later, rage radiating from every movement. "This is insane," he shouted at anyone who would listen. "My mother would never. Bethany, tell them this is a mistake." The fact that he appealed to me after 7 years of treating me like a genetic pariah would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic. Detective Watts brought me to an observation room where I could watch Vera's interrogation through one-way glass. Her lawyer, a shark named Pemberton from downtown, sat beside her. "Mrs. Caldwell, we have video footage of you entering the NICU at 3:47 a.m. on April 6th. We have evidence of you accessing potassium chloride from the hospital pharmacy, using your volunteer credentials. We have your computer searches and your journals. Would you like to explain?" Vera straightened her pearls, a gesture I'd seen her make 1,000 times before delivering a cutting remark. My grandson was suffering. The genetic condition he inherited, from his mother's side, was causing him tremendous pain. What I did was merciful. The genetic condition that didn't exist? Detective Watts placed Noah's real test results on the table. "These are your grandson's actual results, Mrs. Caldwell. Perfect metabolic function. No genetic abnormalities." For the first time in all the years I'd known her, Vera's composure cracked. Just a fraction, just a moment, but I saw it. The realization that her plan had been exposed. "That's impossible," she said. "What's impossible is that you murdered a healthy 3-week-old baby to cover up your son's Huntington's marker." Detective Watts placed Devin's genetic results beside Noah's. "You killed your grandson because you couldn't bear the thought of the Hartwell line being anything less than perfect." Vera's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she waved him off. When she spoke, her voice carried the same crisp authority she'd used to dismiss caterers and criticize my table settings. "You don't understand what it's like to build something that matters. The Hartwell name, the legacy, the reputation, it took generations to establish. Devin is brilliant, successful, everything a son should be. I couldn't let him know he was broken. I couldn't let the world know the Hartwell line was contaminated." "So you contaminated the Bethany's reputation instead?" Detective Watts asked. "She was nobody," Vera said simply. "A librarian from no family of distinction. Her suffering was irrelevant compared to preserving Devin's future. He needed to believe the defect came from her. It gave him something to fight against, someone to blame. It made him stronger." I watched my former mother-in-law confess to murdering my son as casually as she'd once criticized my choice of wedding flowers. No remorse, no hesitation, just cold calculation about acceptable losses. Devin's interrogation was different. When confronted with the evidence, with his mother's confession, with the truth about his own genetics, he crumbled. The confident pharmaceutical executive became a shell-shocked man realizing his entire life was built on a murder. "I didn't know," he repeated over and over. "I thought, Mom said the insurance was just prudent planning. She said Bethany's genes. I believed her. I always believed her." Detective Watts wasn't sympathetic. "You took the insurance money. You built your company on your son's death." "I thought it was compensation for my pain, for what Bethany's genetics had cost me." "What about Bethany's pain?" Detective Watts asked. 7 years of believing she killed her child? Devin looked through the glass then, though he couldn't see me. For a moment, I saw the man I'd married, the one who'd cried at Noah's birth. Then his lawyer arrived, and the walls went back up. The grand jury indicted them both within a week. Vera for first-degree murder, Devin for insurance fraud and conspiracy after the fact. They couldn't prove he knew about the murder beforehand, but his actions afterward, his cruel treatment of me, his profiting from Noah's death, all of it painted a picture of complicity, if not direct involvement. The trial date was set for 6 months out. 6 months to prepare to face them in court, to tell Noah's real story, to finally assign blame where it belonged. Not on my genes, not on my unknown biological history, but on a woman so obsessed with perfection that she'd murdered her own grandson to preserve an illusion. That night, I called my sister Camille. "I need to tell you something about Noah," I said when she answered. "Beth, what's wrong?" "He didn't die from my genes. He was murdered, and I need my family back." The silence stretched across the phone line. Then Camille was crying, saying my name over and over, apologizing for 7 years of distance, 7 years of fear, 7 years of believing a lie that had destroyed more than just me. The courtroom was packed the day of sentencing. 6 months of testimony, evidence, and revelations had led to this moment. Vera stood in her prison jumpsuit, a far cry from her usual St. John suits, as the judge read the verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder, sentenced to life without parole. She was 71 years old. She would die in prison. Devin received 25 years for conspiracy and insurance fraud. The prosecution had found emails between him and his mother from the week after Noah's death, discussing the insurance payout and how to manage the narrative around my genetic culpability. He might not have known about the murder beforehand, but he'd enthusiastically participated in destroying me afterward. "Does the victim's mother wish to make a statement?" the judge asked. I stood, my legs steady for the first time in 7 years. Camille sat in the front row with my mother, both of them crying silently. Behind them sat Patricia from the bookstore, Dr. Reeves, who'd uncovered the truth, and surprisingly, Devin's new wife, Melissa, who'd filed for divorce the day after his arrest and brought their twin boys to meet me, saying they deserved to know about their brother. "Your Honor," I began, my voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "For 7 years, I believed I killed my son with defective genes. I lost everything: my marriage, my home, my career, my family's trust, and most importantly, my right to grieve Noah properly." While I was tormented by guilt, his killer attended charity galas and posted Facebook photos with her new grandchildren. She watched me fall apart and felt nothing but satisfaction that her plan had worked. I turned to face Vera directly. "You killed Noah because you couldn't accept that your precious Hartwell bloodline carried Huntington's disease. But here's what you never understood. Noah was perfect, not because of his genes, but because he was loved. In his 3 weeks of life, he knew nothing but love. That's the only legacy that matters." Vera's expression never changed, rigid and cold to the end. But Devin was sobbing, the reality of what he'd lost and what he'd done finally breaking through his denial. After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse with Camille and my mother, breathing free air that didn't taste like guilt for the first time since Noah died. Reporters pushed forward with questions, but I only answered one. "What do you want people to know about your story?" I looked directly at the camera. That mother's intuition is real. I knew something was wrong with the story of Noah's death, but I let people with louder voices and fancier degrees convince me to doubt myself. If something feels wrong, keep pushing for answers. The truth might be horrible, but it's better than living with a lie. The settlement from the hospital's insurance and the civil suit against the Hartwell estate came to $3 million. I donated a third to the Innocence Project because I knew what it felt like to be wrongly blamed. Another third went to creating the Noah Hartwell Foundation for genetic testing and counseling for families who actually needed it. Families dealing with real genetic conditions, not manufactured ones. With the final third, I bought a small house in Oak Park with a garden where I planted roses that bloomed every spring around Noah's birthday. I returned to working with children, but now as a grief counselor for parents who'd lost infants. I told them what I wished someone had told me. Sometimes tragedy isn't random. Sometimes it isn't your fault, and healing comes from truth, even when that truth is more horrible than the lie. Dr. Monica Reese, my therapist, asked me during our last session how I felt about forgiveness. "I don't forgive Vera," I said honestly. "Some acts are unforgivable. She murdered a baby to protect her pride, but I forgave myself, and that's what matters." I kept one photo on my mantle, Noah at 3 days old, perfect and loved. Underneath, a small plaque read, "Noah Hartwell, 3 weeks of life, a lifetime of love. Your truth freed Mommy." Devin wrote me once from prison, a long, rambling letter about his sorrow and his shock about his Huntington's diagnosis. He wanted absolution I couldn't give him. He'd spent 7 years telling everyone I'd killed our son with defective genes while building his fortune on Noah's grave. His tears at the trial didn't erase the cruelty of his abandonment, but his twin boys, Thomas and Andrew, visit me once a month. Melissa brings them, and we look at photos of Noah together. They know they had a big brother who died, and when they're older, I'll tell them the full truth. not to hurt them, but to arm them against anyone who would tell them their worth is in their genes rather than their hearts. The last time I visited Noah's grave, I brought him a letter I'd written about everything that had happened. I read it aloud to his headstone, then burned it there in the cemetery, watching 7 years of lies turn to ash and drift away on the wind. "You were never broken, baby," I whispered to the stone, and neither was I. Some stories don't get happy endings, but sometimes they get just endings, and that has to be enough. Noah couldn't be brought back, but his truth could be told. His murder could be punished. His mother could finally grieve him properly, without the weight of false guilt. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't always heal, but it does set you free. And after 7 years of prison built from lies, freedom felt like breathing again, like spring after the longest winter, like coming home to myself at last. I think Noah would want me to be free. I think he'd want me to know that love is stronger than genetics, that truth is stronger than lies, and that a mother's love survives even the cruelest deceptions. His 3 weeks of life mattered not because of his genes, but because he was here. He was loved, and his story, his real story, deserved to be told. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart or opened your eyes, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your comments mean everything. Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true stories that remind us all that truth, no matter how painful, is always worth fighting for. Click the notification bell so you never miss a story that could change your perspective on justice, family, and the power of a mother's love.